Welcome, dreamy travellers of myth and moonlight, to the Sleepy Mythologist. Tonight we drift back to the golden age of the gods, to a time when mighty Zeus ruled the skies, and a simple headache led to the birth of one of the most powerful goddesses in all of Olympus, Athena. But before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Whether you're listening from a quiet corner of Greece, a cosy home in Canada, or somewhere far across the seas, leave a comment and say hello. Now close your eyes if you wish, get comfortable, and let the myths begin. Long ago, before cities had names and before time was measured by clocks, the world was ruled by gods who walked among clouds and whispered secrets into the wind. At the centre of it all sat Zeus, the king of the gods, lord of the thunder, ruler of Olympus. He was mighty beyond imagining, capable of calling down lightning with a glance and commanding the skies to bend to his will. But even the most powerful beings can feel pain. And on this particular day, Zeus felt a pain that no thunderbolt could chase away. It began as a dull throb just behind his eyes, a pressure not unlike the weight of a mountain settling on his brow. At first he ignored it. After all, gods do not complain about such things. There were storms to guide, prayers to listen to, and mortals to bless, or punish. But as the sun climbed higher into the heavens, so too did the pain deepen. It pulsed with each beat of his divine heart, blooming behind his forehead like a flower made of flame. No one on Olympus dared mention it at first. Zeus was not known for patience, especially when it came to his own discomfort. But as the hours stretched on, it became impossible to ignore. The animals in the forest below grew restless. The winds around Mount Olympus spun in uneasy circles. Even the other gods began to feel it. Not the pain itself, but the shift in the air. The tension that thickened like a summer storm about to break. What was this ache that even a god could not bear? Zeus retreated to his throne room, the great marble hall crowned with pillars taller than any tree. Surrounded by clouds that shimmered with power, he sat down heavily, cradling his head in his hands, and for the first time in many ages, he looked unsure, not frightened exactly, but as if he knew that something larger than himself had taken root inside him. He closed his eyes and listened to the rhythm of his own breath. He heard more than air in his lungs. He heard movement, not the rustling of robes or the whisper of Olympus, but something internal, something alive, something thinking. The gods gathered at a distance, watching. Hera, his queen, furrowed her brow. Hermes, ever the messenger, paced nervously, tapping his winged sandals on the floor. Even Apollo, god of healing and music, stood silent, sensing that this was not an illness he could soothe with song or medicine. And high above them, in the thoughts of Zeus, there was a stirring, like the flutter of wings inside an egg not yet cracked. This was no ordinary pain. This was the beginning of a miracle, or a reckoning, or perhaps both. And still the headache grew. Whispers travelled quickly on Mount Olympus. Not like mortal gossip passed from mouth to mouth, but more like wind, more like fire leaping from one tree to the next. And soon, those whispers carried a strange and unsettling truth: Zeus has a headache. To the mortal ear, such news might have seemed absurd, even humorous. After all, what is a headache to a god? But to the immortals of Olympus, it was something far more serious. The king of the gods did not fall ill. He did not suffer. He did not grimace or groan or press his temples as though he could squeeze the ache away. And yet that is precisely what he was doing. They said it began early in the morning, just as the first light painted the Aegean Sea with gold. Zeus had risen as usual, commanding the dawn with a sweeping gesture of his hand. But something in his face had shifted, a tightness in his jaw, a flicker of his eye, the way he clenched the thunderbolt tighter than usual. The servants of Olympus noticed first, then the lesser gods, then the stars themselves, who paused in their nightly dance to gaze down and wonder why the great ruler of the sky seemed burdened. By midday, the pain had grown so intense that Zeus no longer spoke. He wandered the halls of Olympus in a daze, one hand constantly pressing to his forehead, the other dragging across walls of white marble, leaving streaks of divine energy that hissed and sparked like lightning trapped in stone. The air around him grew heavy. Clouds darkened even under the noonday sun, birds stopped singing, and across the world mortals felt uneasy as though some great imbalance had taken hold of the heavens. It wasn't long before the other gods began to gather in concern. Hera, his wife and queen, approached first, regal and composed, but with a rare softness in her voice. She reached out a hand to his shoulder. "What troubles you, my husband?" she asked. but Zeus did not answer. He winced, and for the first time in Hera's long life, she saw something she had never seen on his face. Fear. Not terror, but something quieter, deeper. The kind of fear that comes when you realize something ancient and powerful is stirring within you, and you do not yet understand what it is. Soon others arrived. Athena had not yet been born, but Apollo and Artemis came, their footsteps echoing in the corridors like music slowed to a crawl. Poseidon appeared in a shimmer of sea foam, leaning on his trident, eyes scanning his brother's face for answers. Even Demeter paused her tending of the earth to peer into the sky with concern. The realm was pausing to ask the same question, over and over again. Why does Zeus not speak? Hermes, ever curious, flitted from chamber to chamber, asking questions in his usual half-joking tone. But there was no joy in his mischief that day. "A headache?" he asked again and again. "A headache, really? From what? From thinking too hard? From carrying Olympus on your back?" Still no answer came, and so the gods began to speculate. Some believed it was a punishment. Perhaps Zeus had offended some older force, a forgotten titan, or a primal element buried beneath the world. Others wondered if it was prophecy, some unspoken fate weaving its way into reality, warning them of what was to come. A few even whispered that it might be the end of Zeus's reign, that something or someone was about to be born, and his pain was the signal of a new age approaching. But no one knew for certain, not even Zeus. And the longer the headache lingered, the deeper the mystery grew. Not just a pain behind his eyes, it seemed to grow with him, swelling like a storm cloud, pressing outward, alive and electric. He began to see visions when he closed his eyes. Flashes of armor, the glint of a spear, the calm and brilliant eyes of a warrior who had not yet taken her first breath. Somewhere within his very skull, a presence was forming. And though none of the gods yet understood what that meant, one thing had become clear to them all. This was no ordinary headache. It was the beginning of something divine, deep within the hidden folds of Olympus, while the skies churned and Zeus paced restlessly through thunder-laced corridors. Something ancient and powerful stirred inside him. Though no one yet knew it, not even Zeus himself, this pain was not sickness, yes, sung, not curse, not madness. It was potential. It was the birth of a thought so complete, so radiant, that it could not be contained by mind or flesh. It was a being, a goddess, and her time was approaching. But before her birth, before the sharp crack of an axe split open the sky god's skull, she had to wait. She had to form, she had to think. Because the goddess growing inside Zeus was no ordinary deity. She was not born of fire, nor of sea foam, nor even of a mother's womb. She was born of mind, pure, luminous thought. She was the embodiment of reason, wisdom, and strategic war. She would become Athena, but in this timeless moment, before her name was ever spoken, she was simply becoming. And she waited. Inside the dark, echoing vastness of Zeus's consciousness, she grew, not in the way mortal children grow, with limbs and skin and bone, but with ideas. She stirred in dreams and flickers of insight. Each thunderclap of pain Zeus felt was another spark of her forming intellect. Each pulse in his temple was her silent breath. She floated there in the infinite chamber of his mind, surrounded not by amniotic fluid, but by memory, prophecy, vision, and the distant songs of fate. She heard things that Zeus had long forgotten. Ancient prayers from trembling mortals, the rumble of his father Cronus swallowing his siblings whole, the rush of wind over Mount Ida, where he had once hidden from destruction. These sounds became her lullabies, and in the quiet she began to think, not in words, but in presence. She organized the chaos around her. She tamed the lightning storms of thought. She listened to the world, turning beyond her host, and understood it in ways no one ever had. Athena was never meant to be a child. She was born full-grown in spirit, formed not by years but by truth. And still she waited, wrapped in silence, pressing gently against the boundaries of her father's skull, not with force, not with impatience, but with certainty. She knew the world needed her. Though not yet born, she already saw it. Cities built on dreams but teetering on pride. Wars fought by brute strength without clarity. Mortals hungry for knowledge but stumbling in darkness. There was beauty, yes, but there was also folly. And folly more than any monster needed taming. She would be the one to bring balance. Outside, Zeus groaned. His hands trembled as they gripped his throne. The pain was worsening, not simply because the goddess was growing, but because her presence was demanding release. She could not remain thought forever. Thought must become action. Wisdom must wear a face. Even the fates who spun the destinies of gods and men alike paused their weaving and looked up from their eternal task. They felt the disturbance in the threads of time. Something unprecedented was unfolding, a birth not from womb but from will, a divine intellect born not of love or desire but of necessity. Still she waited. Not long now. Within Zeus's mind there came a tremble, a subtle shift, like the cracking of ancient ice over deep waters, the first fracture in the prison that held her. She knew then that the time was near. The thoughts that formed her would no longer be contained. The headache would reach its breaking point. A god's mind could not hold her forever. She did not scream or cry or panic. She remained still, calm, sovereign. For she was the goddess of wisdom, and wisdom always knows when to wait. Long before the headache, long before the sky split and the goddess emerged, there was a quiet, forgotten moment, a choice made in secrecy, in fear, and in destiny. That moment began with Metis. Metis was no ordinary goddess. She was not fierce like Artemis, nor stormy like Hera. She was quieter, deeper. She was the goddess of wisdom before wisdom had a name, a titaness older than Olympus itself. She carried with her the calm intelligence of flowing rivers and the ancient logic of the stars. Her power did not shout, it whispered, like an idea that takes root in silence and grows until it changes everything. Zeus, in the early days of his reign, admired Metis, perhaps even loved her, though gods do not love as mortals do. He was young then, new to his throne, ambitious, still bearing the scars of the war against the Titans. He sought counsel, not just flattery, and Métis, wise and elusive, offered guidance that no thunderbolt could provide. She advised him in the arts of leadership, in the balancing of justice and fear, in the delicate games of fate and divine law. But then a prophecy arrived. As so often happens among gods, it came not with warning, but as a rumour that wrapped itself around Olympus like smoke. Gaia, the earth herself, whispered it into the hearts of oracles and into the dreams of seers. The prophecy said that Metis would bear a child. The first child would be a daughter, wise and powerful, but the second child would be a son so strong he would overthrow his father, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus, and as Cronus had overthrown Uranus before him. It was the curse of succession, the fate of all rulers, the cycle that none could escape. And Zeus, mighty as he was, trembled. He had spent eons fighting his way to the top, had battled titans, imprisoned monsters, and raised Olympus from war-scarred rubble. He would not be cast down by his own child, not again, not ever. So he made a decision, a terrible, calculated decision. He invited Metis to walk with him, far from the marble halls of Olympus, into the hidden groves where time seemed to pause and the air was thick with divine energy. They talked, perhaps of fate, perhaps of dreams, perhaps of nothing at all. And as she spoke, Zeus watched her, watched the way she spoke with calm certainty, how her presence made the world feel clear and ordered. And then he did what no lover should ever do. He opened his mouth and swallowed her whole. Just like Cronus had swallowed his children, Zeus swallowed the mother of his. But it was not the same. Metis did not vanish. She did not die. She simply changed. She descended into him, into the deepest part of his being. She became thought. She became memory. She became a voice in the back of his mind that never stopped speaking, never stopped shaping, never stopped creating. Inside him she was still alive, and she was pregnant. Metis, in her wisdom, did not rage. She understood the nature of power. She had seen what came before and what would come after. She knew that her daughter would still be born, and not despite Zeus's fear, but because of it. The seed had been planted. The child would grow, not in a womb, but in a mind, not with the warmth of a mother's body, but with the fire of divine intellect. And so the headache began. It began with Metis. She whispered through Zeus's bones. She shaped thoughts into form. She nurtured the child within, not with flesh, but with clarity, strategy, and reason. This was no ordinary birth. This was a convergence of two great intelligences, Zeus's raw divine will and Metis's infinite wisdom combining to give rise to something entirely new. And so, while the other gods watched Zeus suffer, confused by the pain they could not cure, the truth pulsed quietly within him. Metis was working. She was building a goddess, one born not of fear but of inevitability. And in every crackle of Zeus's nerves, in every throbbing wave of pressure behind his eyes, the future grew nearer. The goddess was coming, and no force, not even Zeus himself, could stop her. The tale of why Zeus swallowed Metis is one of fear, prophecy, and power, but above all it is a tale of cycles, of ancient patterns the gods themselves cannot escape. Zeus, ruler of Olympus, lord of lightning, had won his throne through rebellion. He had cast down his own father, Cronus, who had in turn overthrown Uranus, the primordial sky. That cycle of child-dethroning parent was etched into the bones of the universe. It was not just history, it was fate, a pattern whispered by the fates themselves, who wove the destinies of all their beings, even the immortal. And Zeus knew that pattern well. He had been the usurper once. He had watched Cronus devour his children in fear, desperate to halt the rise of a new generation. And though Zeus had defeated that fear by outwitting his father, the memory lingered. Power won is never entirely secure, especially not on Olympus. So when the prophecy came, delivered not by a single voice, but by the murmur of existence itself, Zeus felt a chill unlike any storm he had conjured. The words were simple but devastating. Metis shall bear 2 children. The first shall be a daughter, wise, noble, and powerful. But the second shall be a son who shall be greater than his father, and cast him down. Metis, the goddess of cleverness and deep thought, was already carrying Zeus's child, the first child. But Zeus could not take the chance. He did not wait to see if the prophecy would unfold. He had seen what waiting had done to Cronus, and so he acted. But Zeus was not his father, not entirely. Cronus had swallowed his children whole, one by one, thinking that would protect him. He had imprisoned them in his stomach, ignorant of the lives still growing within. Zeus's act was more cunning, more symbolic. He would not just destroy the mother of the child, he would contain her, absorb her, swallow her essence, her intelligence, her power. He would prevent the prophecy not with brute force, but with domination of the mind. So one day he called Metis to him. She came, as she always did, with calm eyes and a quiet smile. Perhaps she already knew what was coming. Some say she saw it in a vision. Others say she loved Zeus enough to come willingly, knowing that her role was no longer to rule beside him, but to give birth to something greater. Zeus, with all the charm and majesty of the king of gods, reached for her, and in a moment both tender and terrible, he opened his mouth and swallowed her whole. There was no scream, no struggle, only silence, and then stillness. Metis was gone from the world, but not truly gone. Within Zeus she lingered, alive in thought, in dream, in intuition, a presence he could not explain but could never escape. She became part of him. She whispered answers to questions he hadn't asked. She stirred in his bones when he made decisions, and most of all she began to create, because Metis was already pregnant. And inside Zeus, the child continued to grow, not in flesh but in consciousness. The act of swallowing Metis had not stopped the prophecy. It had fulfilled it. In trying to prevent his fate, Zeus had become the very vessel that would bring it about. Still, he did not know this yet. He only knew the headache, a growing, insistent pressure behind his forehead that no god could ease. Not Apollo with his healing hands, not Hera with her counsel, not Dionysus with his wine, nor Hypnos with his sleep. It was the dull thunder of something waiting to be born, a goddess. And not just any goddess, one who would be wisdom incarnate. One who would never know the warmth of a mother's arms, but would spring forth clad in armour, fully formed, her eyes sharp with knowledge drawn from both her parents, Zeus's divine will and Metis's infinite mind. So while Zeus sat upon his throne, his temples pounding, the gods whispered. They wondered what was happening to their king. They feared it might be madness, or illness, or some ancient curse, but none dared guess the truth, that deep inside him, Metis was dreaming. And in that dream she was shaping a daughter, shaping her with clarity, shaping her with strength, shaping her with inevitability, because even gods, for all their power, cannot outrun destiny. And swallowing Meti, far from ending the story, was merely the beginning. The pain had become unbearable. Even for Zeus, whose veins carried lightning and whose voice could command storms, the pressure in his head was now more than a distraction. It was a torment, a divine-to-part torment. It was as if the whole sky had been folded and crammed into his skull, pushing outward with the force of prophecy and something older still, birth. Not of a mortal child, but of a being made of pure thought, pure war, pure wisdom. Day turned to night and back again, but Zeus could no longer tell the difference. He walked the golden halls of Olympus like a god in exile, present, yet lost inside himself. He growled at passing winds, he snarled at the sound of birdsong. Even the chimes of Apollo's lyre grated against him like shards of glass against bone. No relief came, no rest. Only the steady, searing, swelling weight behind his eyes and deep in his skull. And through it all, he still refused to tell the others what he had done. He did not speak of Metis, did not speak of the prophecy, did not confess that he had, in his fear, swallowed the mother of wisdom. But the other gods had begun to wonder. The storm inside Zeus's mind had become so powerful that it radiated outward, distorting Olympus itself. Clouds thickened even on clear days. The stars above blinked uncertainly, as if confused by the chaos beneath them. The earth rumbled softly, not in anger, but in anticipation. Something was building, the gods could feel it in their bones. Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, peered out from his forge beneath the mountain. Even as his hammer struck divine metal, and fire licked the edges of his beard, he paused. He felt the disturbance not just in the heavens, but in the very act of creation. He knew what it meant to build something within. He knew the pressure, the unbearable tension that comes before form emerges from fire. But this was different. This was not iron, not gold, not bronze. This was a soul trying to be born through the skull of a king. Within Zeus, the storm raged louder. He tried to sleep. He couldn't. He tried to drink nectar and drown the ache. Nothing dulled it. He pressed cold clouds to his forehead. He called upon Apollo to sing. He ordered silence across Olympus. But none of it mattered. Because the pain wasn't outside. It wasn't caused by anything external. It was the child. She was ready. Inside his skull, the pressure had changed. No longer just chaotic swelling, it was becoming organized. A rhythm, a pulse. She was moving. Not as a fetus would move in a womb, but as thought stirs in a dreaming mind. She was shifting in form, clarifying, finding her shape. Her thoughts were taking on weight. Her presence was no longer just an idea, it was an identity. An identity demands space. The pain sharpened. A high, bright pain, piercing like a spear, persistent like a ringing bell that would not fade. Zeus roared, not in fury but in desperation. The sound rolled across the mountaintops, sending avalanches tumbling, shaking the roots of trees, stilling every living thing within the sound of Olympus. Mortals below dropped their tools and looked to the heavens. The sea paused in its waves. Animals froze mid-step. The world held its breath. And still the pain did not stop. There are many kinds of pain, the dull ache of sorrow, the deep wound of betrayal, the burning agony of loss. But the pain Zeus felt now was something entirely different. It was the agony of creation, of something divine trying to enter the world in a way it never had before. Zeus was a father, yes. He had sired many children, but never like this, never through himself, never through mind and marrow, through fear and fate. This birth was not simply biological, it was mythic. It was symbolic. It was cosmic. It was as if the very idea of wisdom had grown too large to remain unspoken, and had chosen the only path available, to tear open the head of the king of gods. Zeus gritted his teeth. Sparks fell from his eyes. Lightning leapt from his fingertips involuntarily. He clutched his skull and howled, and far below in the silence of the mortal world poets felt a tremor in their hearts, because wisdom was coming, and wisdom never arrives quietly. At last, when the agony became more than even a god could bear, Zeus did something unthinkable. He asked for help. Not from Musasso, whose healing hands could soothe fever and mend broken bones. Not from Hera, whose intuition might have uncovered the deeper meaning of his torment. Not even from the Moirai, the fates who wove every thread of destiny. No, he called for Hephaestus, the god of fire, the master of forge and flame, the one who shaped swords that cut the fabric of war and shields that held back chaos itself. Hephaestus was no gentle healer. His hands were blistered from hammering stars into weapons, his beard singed by divine sparks. He was the god of violent creation, of building through pressure, of birthing shape from pain. Zeus summoned him not with words, but with a roar that split the clouds. Thunder cracked, the sky turned black, and from the heart of the mountain, Hephaestus rose, his hammer still warm from his forge. He moved not quickly, but deliberately, each step echoing with the weight of iron and inevitability. When he entered the great hall of Olympus, he saw Zeus, slumped on his throne, head clutched between shaking hands, sparks flying from his temples, eyes wild with pain. Hephaestus approached cautiously. "You called, father?" Zeus did not answer with speech. Instead, he opened his eyes, blazing with stormlight, and pointed to his head. There are stories, fanciful ones, that claim Hephaestus laughed at the absurdity of the request, that he questioned his father's sanity. But deeper myths, older than song or script, tell a different version that Hephaestus understood immediately, that he saw not madness, but necessity. He looked into Zeus's face and saw not just suffering, but a crack in the old order, a moment where something was trying to be born, not from earth or sea or womb, but from thought itself. And Hephaestus, god of the forge, knew exactly what to do. He raised his hammer. This was no ordinary tool. It was the hammer that had shaped divine armour, that had sealed the gates of Tartarus, that had beaten titans into chains. It pulsed with celestial heat and rang with the music of creation. He stepped forward. Zeus gave no protest. He was beyond speech now, beyond pride. The pain had become everything. Hephaestus held the hammer high. For a moment, time itself seemed to hesitate. The other gods stood frozen, watching from shadows. Even the stars paused in their spinning, sensing what was about to happen. Then Hephaestus brought the hammer down. Not on Zeus's heart, not on his chest, but directly on his forehead. A single blow. It rang like a bell across the cosmos. The force of it echoed through the bones of Olympus, rippling across the sky, splitting the clouds in all directions. Lightning scattered in wild, brilliant arcs. The earth trembled. The ocean surged. Mortals fell to their knees, struck by visions they could not explain. Visions of a woman in armour, radiant and terrible, emerging from flame and thunder. From the wound in Zeus's skull came not blood but light. Blinding, golden white light. And from within that light, a figure stepped forth, calm, poised, and already greater than anything the gods had ever seen. She did not crawl, she did not cry. She arrived, clad in gleaming armour, spear in hand, shield unarmed, eyes full of knowledge far older than time. She emerged fully grown, not as an infant, but as a warrior, born not of pain alone, but of thought, strategy, and inevitable truth. Hephaestus lowered his hammer. Zeus collapsed back onto his throne, the pain suddenly gone, as if it had never been, but in its place was awe. A hollow silence filled the room, and then, slowly, the gods realized what had happened. Wisdom had been born, and not gently, not peacefully, but forged, like all great things, through fire and force. Hephaestus said nothing. He did not need to. His blow had changed Olympus forever. His hammer, the symbol of brutal creation, had opened the gateway to a new kind of power, and the one who stepped through that gate would never be forgotten. From the crack in the sky, God's forehead came a sound unlike any that had ever been heard before. It was not a cry of pain or a triumphant roar, nor the screeching thunder Zeus so often hurled from the heavens. No, this was a new sound, a shimmering, ringing note, like the strike of metal upon metal, but clearer, purer, echoing with the clarity of thought itself. Then came the light. It poured from the opening in Zeus's skull, not as fire or smoke, but as pure brilliance, golden, white, and tinged with silver, like moonlight touching water. The gods shielded their eyes. The halls of Olympus trembled. Even the stars blinked uncertainly, their ancient songs interrupted by this sudden eruption of divinity. From that divine fracture, she stepped forward. Not crawled, not stumbled, stepped. With the grace of inevitability and the calm of one who had waited for this moment since before time had a name, a being of perfect balance. Her feet touched the marble floor of Olympus with the sound of reason. Her armour glinted as though forged in the light of truth itself. Her eyes, deep grey ancient, swept across the world as though she had seen it all before, and understood it even before it existed. Athena had arrived. The goddess born not from the womb but from thought, born not in secret but in spectacle, not in weakness but in might. The gods could only stare. She was radiant but not delicate, strong but not brutal. Her body bore no softness, no need for nurturing. She was complete. From her shoulders flowed a cloak the colour of storm clouds on the still water. In one hand she held a spear, not raised in anger, but poised in readiness. In the other, a shield gleaming with symbols no god had ever seen before, emblems of justice, strategy, and the cool, unflinching truth of logic. No one spoke. Even Hermes, quick-tongued and irreverent, found his lips still. Even Hera, suspicious and proud, could only watch with quiet awe. And Zeus sat silent and stunned. The pain was gone. His head was no longer split, but whole, yet changed. Something had been taken from him, yet something greater had been left behind. For in that moment he understood what he had done, not in panic but in reverence. He had not merely avoided the prophecy, he had fulfilled a deeper one. He had brought forth a goddess who would shape the very foundation of the world, not through brute force like Ares, but through clarity, courage, and wisdom. And Athena, she did not cry out or kneel. She did not reach for her father in gratitude or stumble from the trauma of birth. She stood tall, still, and sovereign. She looked not only at Zeus, but at all the gods gathered before her, and in her gaze they saw themselves, less as they were, and more as they could be. Because Athena was not just a goddess. She was an idea made flesh, the embodiment of insight, the protector of cities, the strategist of war who knew when not to fight, the patroness of thinkers, artists, and lawmakers. She was not born of passion or accident, but of design, an echo of Métis, her mother's mind preserved and reborn through her. The skies calmed, the wind softened. Some say that owls appeared above Olympus at that very moment, gliding silently through the golden air, as if summoned by her presence, symbols of vision and vigilance, her eternal companions. Others say that the mortal world stirred in ways it could not yet understand, that somewhere far below, in the hearts of humans, the first sparks of philosophy ignited, that in distant lands future temples shivered with anticipation, already waiting to be built in her name. Athena looked to her father, and Zeus, though king of gods, did not command her. He did not name her. He did not lay claim to her power. Instead, he bowed his head, slightly, reverently, for even he, ruler of sky and storm, knew that something had shifted, something had begun, and thus the goddess stepped fully into the world, not born of love, nor hate, nor flesh, but born of vision, and the world would never be the same. She did not enter the world weeping or helpless. She did not crawl, she did not cry, she did not cling to a mother's chest. When Athena emerged from the head of Zeus, she entered not as a newborn, but as a being already whole, already sovereign, fully grown, fully armed, fully radiant with knowledge and might. The other gods could barely comprehend what they were seeing. Never in all the mythic cycles had there been such a birth. This was not a daughter in need of protection, nor a child who would grow into power. This was power already realized, a goddess not shaped by time but formed in timelessness. She had been born inside the mind of Zeus. Her cradle was consciousness, her breath was insight, her blood was clarity itself. She stood tall, her armour shining like morning sunlight on polished stone. Her spear did not tremble in her grasp, it was as steady as thought. Her helmet, perfectly fitted, cast a solemn shadow over her brow, and behind her a cloak fell like the veil of twilight, symbol of her role not only as a warrior, but as the silent guardian of wisdom, strategy, and restraint. Athena bore no trace of fear or confusion. She understood the gods before her, she knew them. She looked at Ares with calm defiance, already knowing the limits of brute force. She met Apollo's eyes without blinking, as if to say, "I too know the music of the spheres." She turned to Hermes, and even he, god of wit and words, felt the quiet edge of her intellect press against his own, like the cool blade of a dagger still sheathed. But most of all, she looked at Zeus, and in that gaze was everything. Not reverence, not rebellion, recognition. She knew what had been done, she knew where she had come from, she remembered the silence of thought before she had form, the humming voice of Metis whispering within her in the quiet dark. She remembered the weight of the mind that held her, and the pain her presence had caused. And Zeus, mighty as he was, looked into her eyes and saw not a daughter alone, but a mirror. A reflection of his own power, refined and reimagined. The raw strength of his rule, now reborn as elegant precision. The fury of the storm translated into strategy and foresight. This was not a being he could command. He could not possess her, for she had not been given. She had arrived. She did not ask to be accepted. She was not a request. She was a statement. The silence in Olympus deepened. The gods, immortal, eternal, accustomed to all manner of miracles, could only stand and watch. Because what had just occurred was not merely a birth, it was a shift in the structure of divine reality. A new form of power had entered the world, not chaos, not creation through destruction, but order through wisdom. The kind of power that built cities, that advised kings, that charted the stars, that taught mortals to seek truth in the quiet corners of the soul. Athena took her first step upon the marble floor, and it echoed like the first line of a poem. She walked not with the hesitancy of youth, but with the bearing of a ruler. She did not smile, nor did she frown. She was composed, poised between patience and resolve, justice and strength. Her silence spoke more than 1,000 songs. Some say that the ground where her first footstep landed became the birthplace of Athens, that even before mortals named the city, the earth had already chosen its guardian. Others say that owls circled the heights of Olympus that day, eyes wide with the secret understanding of what had just occurred. Still others believe that in far-off corners of the world, those attuned to the rhythms of fate felt a chill and a stirring, like the opening of a door in the mind. Athena was here, and she needed no announcement. She had emerged from the head of the mightiest god, not broken, not bleeding, but blazing, a goddess of intellect and warfare, of knowledge and cities, of law and balance. She was proof that the sharpest edge is not always steel but thought, that the greatest force is not found in the arm but in the mind behind it. No divine parade followed her birth, no feast, no celebration, only a kind of awe, deep, still and resonant. The other gods stepped back, not out of fear, but because they understood. Something unlike anything before had been born, and she would not be overshadowed. She would walk beside them, but she would not bow. She would shape the fate of mortals and gods alike, not through storms but through understanding, through the careful movement of logic, the bravery of silence, the courage to speak when it mattered most. Athena had been born from the mind of Zeus, and now the mind of the world had changed forever. For a long moment after her emergence, silence gripped Olympus. The gods who had seen mountains raised and titans fall, who had watched the seas split and stars be born, stood without breath. Not because they were afraid, but because they were uncertain. Athena had not cried. She had not wailed or whimpered or clung to anyone for comfort. She had not stumbled from Zeus's head in a daze. She had stepped into the world with complete control, as though she had always been there, merely waiting to appear. She was a goddess born without a mother's touch. There were no lullabies, no gentle rocking, no warm arms. She had not grown slowly, year by year, under the guidance of a parent's love. Her growth had happened within, silently and alone, inside the boundless mind of Zeus. Her birth was sudden, violent, divine. There was no midwife, no cradle, no childhood. She had no lull, no softness, no safety from which to emerge. She was born of consciousness, not come at it. And because of that, something in her nature would always be distant. Not cold, not cruel, but solitary. The gods felt this as they watched her. Hera, goddess of marriage and motherhood, could feel the absence most acutely. She gazed at Athena with a strange sorrow, an ache for what had been denied to the child. No mother's arms, no whispered lessons, no gentle hand on the brow after a restless dream. Yet Athena did not seem diminished by this absence, quite the opposite. She stood with the self-possession of a queen, a warrior, a thinker. Her armour gleamed not with decoration but with purpose. There was no vanity in her, no desire to be admired. She carried herself as one who needed nothing from anyone. She did not belong to Zeus, nor to Olympus. She had not been given life, she had taken it. But still, the silence that followed her birth spoke volumes. Zeus, usually the loudest voice in the heavens, said nothing. His great frame rested on the throne, shoulders slightly hunched, not from weakness, but from awe. The pain that had tormented him for days was gone, but something remained in its place, something heavy, a weight not of agony, but of meaning. He knew he had not just fathered a goddess. He had released an idea into the world, one that could not be chained or guided, even by him. And yet, though she had emerged from his very mind, she was not his creation alone. Inside her moved the quiet pulse of Metis, the wisdom of the mother swallowed but not silenced. That deep, ancient intelligence echoed in Athena's eyes. Though she had never heard Metis's voice aloud, it was within her, like a compass that always pointed toward justice, clarity, and truth. Still, even the most powerful beings are shaped by what they do not receive. Athena's strength was unmatched, her insight sharp as any blade, but the lack of a mother's hand, a soft word in her infancy, left an invisible line drawn across her soul. She would always walk the world with a kind of independence that few could reach. She could guide armies and advise kings. She could win battles without drawing blood, build cities from dreams, and tame the wild logic of fate itself. But she would never need anyone. And perhaps that was her greatest strength and her deepest solitude. The other gods, each born of union or chaos, each shaped by relationships, found it difficult to understand her. They admired her, they feared her, but they could not fully know her. She was too complete, too precise. She came into existence as the answer to a question the world had not yet asked. Even the goddesses who might have welcomed her into sisterhood, Artemis, Aphrodite, Demeter, felt that boundary. Athena was not like them. She did not speak of desire or love. She did not crave companionship. She was born with all she needed already within her. There was no wound to heal, no insecurity to quiet. She was, and yet mortals would look to her with wonder. For while she was distant from the warmth of motherhood, she was close to the pulse of humanity's highest hopes. They would build temples for her, not because she promised fertility or pleasure or vengeance, but because she made sense. In a world of chaos, she offered order. In a life of pain, she offered purpose. She represented what could be achieved through thought, through discipline, through insight. But none of it would have been possible if she had not been born as she was, sudden, solitary, unheld. She had no need to be comforted, because she was the comfort of clarity. No mother had kissed her brow, no lullaby had rocked her to sleep. And yet, she would become the guardian of civilization, the goddess of wisdom, the protector of cities, the mind within the storm. And she would never forget that her first breath had been drawn not in a cradle, but in a thunderclap. And from that silence that followed, a new kind of divinity took root in the world. In the breathless aftermath of Athena's birth, a strange and solemn quiet settled over Olympus. It was not the hush of awe alone, nor the stunned pause that follows divine spectacle. It was deeper, more mysterious. A silence that seemed to stretch beyond the gods themselves, curling through the air like mist, filling the vast marble halls and sacred groves with a stillness both beautiful and unnerving. Even the birds that usually sang in the branches near the palace were silent. The fountains, once babbling with laughter-like music, now trickled slowly, reverently. The winds, so often playful or mischievous, had stilled entirely, as if the very breath of nature had been drawn inward in contemplation. Athena stood at the centre of it all, freshly emerged, not gasping for air or crying out, but entirely composed, as if this moment had long been etched into the scrolls of fate, merely waiting to unfold. The silence grew. It was not oppressive, but it was vast. The kind of silence that fills the space before a truth is spoken. The kind that hangs in the air after something sacred has occurred, and no one quite dares to move for fear of disturbing the echoes of what has just been born. No god spoke. Even Apollo, whose lyre so often filled Olympus with golden melodies, kept his hand still. Hera, who so often had something to say, sharp, proud, insightful, remained quiet. Her eyes narrowed not in judgment, but in thought. Even Dionysus, ever eager for celebration or chaos, sat unusually still, his cup untouched. It was Hephaestus, perhaps, who felt the silence most profoundly. He had struck the blow. He had cracked the skull of the king of gods and opened a gateway not to death but to wisdom. And now he stood at the edge of the gathering, hammer hanging limply in his calloused hand, staring at the goddess who had stepped from his father's mind like an idea made real. He had expected chaos, shock, applause, anything, but instead silence. Not a dead silence, a living one. Because this was not the end of something, it was the beginning, and beginnings are quiet before they gather their voice. Athena, still and radiant, did not speak either. She looked around her, not with confusion, but with recognition, as if she understood the weight of this moment more than anyone else. She had been born of the mind, and now she stood within a world that was still learning how to think. She could feel it, the vibrations of history changing beneath her feet. The gods were adjusting to her presence, even if they did not yet realize it. A new kind of power had joined their ranks, not power over love, like Aphrodite, not power over war through fury like Ares, not power over nature like Demeter. Athena was something else. She was the bridge between reason and instinct, between intellect and battle, between logic and will. In the silence, the world listened to her being. The world understood that a new kind of balance had arrived. Zeus remained silent too. The pain was gone, the pressure lifted, but in its place was a reverberation, something echoing within him, a hum that would never quite fade. He had birthed a goddess not from lust, not from romance, not even from strategy, but from thought, pure, piercing, undeniable thought. And thought changes everything. Zeus watched her with an expression no one could name. Not pride, not fear, something between reverence and acceptance. He had tried to avoid a prophecy and had instead brought about a miracle. He had swallowed wisdom, and wisdom had refused to be silenced. It had returned, not as a whisper but as a presence. This silence wasn't just the gods reacting to what they saw. It was the universe recalibrating itself around a new axis. A new centre of gravity had formed, and it was this spear-bearing goddess with storm-grey eyes and armour that reflected not just light, but meaning. The mortals below would later call this moment divine, but in truth it was something even more rare. It was the moment when the cosmos acknowledged its own awakening. A divine mind had stepped forward, a consciousness that did not demand obedience but compelled understanding. Athena was not thunder and fire, she was strategy, thoughtful movement, words sharpened into blades, justice shaped like a shield, and all of Olympus understood, without a single sound, that the silence following her birth was not emptiness. It was reverence. It was the hush of recognition, the stillness that falls when something sacred enters the room. And when she finally moved, when her eyes passed slowly over the gods and her feet stepped softly across the marble floor, the silence did not end. It deepened, because now they were listening, not just with ears, but with memory, with instinct, with awe. Athena had not spoken a word. She didn't need to. The silence itself was now hers. As Athena stood in the great hall of Olympus, newly emerged, yet already eternal, she opened her eyes to the world, not with the confusion of a newborn, but with the poise of someone who had seen everything before it had ever happened. Her gaze moved slowly across the chamber, and every god and goddess who met her eyes felt a shiver, not of fear, but of being seen. Deeply, completely, undeniably seen. Her gaze was like a mirror that showed not only the face, but the soul beneath it. Ares shifted uncomfortably. Apollo, golden and sure of himself, looked away for just a moment. Hermes tilted his head, curious but cautious. Even Hera, imperious and powerful, felt a flicker of something she had not felt in eons. Vulnerability. Because Athena's eyes were not the eyes of a child, they were the eyes of thought itself, eyes that had formed in the depths of divine consciousness, shaped by the boundless wisdom of Meter and the thunderous will of Zeus. They saw not just surface but structure, not just movement but meaning, not just the present but the long web of cause and consequence stretching forward and back. She looked upon Olympus as if she had known it long before her feet touched its floor. The halls, the columns, the sky, none of it surprised her. She had lived within her father's mind for what felt like eternity, and in that endless silence she had learned the language of architecture, of law, of battle, of beauty. She did not need time to adjust. She was not adjusting, she was arriving. She stepped forward, not timidly, but deliberately. Each movement was calm, composed, and full of intention. There was no wasted gesture. She moved like a dancer who knew every beat before the music began. Her armour did not clank, her spear did not wobble, her feet touched the floor with a silence more profound than any proclamation. And the gods watched her, not knowing whether to speak or kneel. What could be said to someone who came into the world already whole? Her face, though young, carried an ancient gravity, not the weariness of age, but the quiet depth of comprehension. She did not laugh, she did not frown, but her presence spoke volumes. She had the dignity of someone who did not need to prove her worth, for her very existence was her proof. She turned her head towards Zeus. Their eyes met. The moment passed between them like the passing of stars, slow, bright, and meaningful. There was no anger in her gaze, no blame, but there was awareness. She knew what he had done, she knew why he had done it, and yet there was no bitterness. Because she also knew this, she was inevitable. Zeus had tried to prevent a prophecy, and in doing so he had fulfilled it. Athena had not been born in the traditional sense, but her birth was more true than most, for she came not from the desires of flesh, but from the necessity of thought, from the weight of destiny, from the logic of the universe itself. In that gaze, Zeus saw all of this, and more. He saw not just his daughter, but his equal, perhaps even more. She had no mother's touch to soften her, no childhood to mould her. She was not shaped by others, she was formed by truth. And still she said nothing. She did not need to declare who she was. Her form said it for her. She was the goddess of wisdom, of strategy, of war guided not by rage but by reason, of civilization itself, the architect of order in a world born of chaos. Where other gods ruled over instinct, passion and impulse, she ruled over thought, over clarity, over the still sharp mind in the centre of the storm. She looked out beyond Olympus then, past the pillars, past the clouds, past the realm of immortals, down to the world of mortals. And even there, even far below, some felt her gaze. In a small village beside a quiet river, a young girl paused in her weaving, her hand stilling without reason. A sculptor working with stone suddenly saw a form in his mind he had never seen before. A warrior, weary from battle, laid down his sword and thought about why he fought in the first place. Because Athena was not just present, she was arriving everywhere. Her influence was already moving like a silent wind, a soft voice behind the thoughts of those who built, questioned, created, and chose peace over pride. She was not a goddess of thunder or wine or wrath, she was the goddess of the mind. And in this first moment, standing silently among gods who did not yet know what to do with her, Athena began her reign, not with fire or fury, but with understanding. She saw Olympus, she saw the gods, she saw the world, and she understood it all. As Athena stood beneath the open sky of Olympus, where the clouds whispered secrets only the gods could hear, a strange question stirred in the minds of those who watched her. Why had she come this way? Why had the universe chosen this path, this painful, violent emergence through Zeus's skull, rather than the gentle unfolding of a mother's womb? And then, slowly, like the movement of stars in the night sky, the answer began to reveal itself, not in words, but in meaning. Athena had not simply appeared, she had been forged, not in a womb of warmth, but in the furnace of thought. She had not been cradled in flesh, but hammered into form by the pressure of intellect. Her birth had not come with lullabies, it had come with a cry of pain, a splitting of the sky god's skull, and a silence that shook the cosmos. And from that pain, wisdom. There is something timeless about this paradox, that clarity so often follows confusion, that vision is born through struggle, that truth often comes not from comfort, but from the disorientation of suffering. This was the deep, enduring lesson that Athena was. She was not born of pleasure, not born of desire. She was born of a headache, of a mind in agony, of a god in torment. And yet what emerged was not madness. What emerged was order. The very essence of Athena lay in that mystery, that sometimes the greatest understanding can only come after the greatest pressure, that wisdom is not always gentle, that it can hurt, that to truly see the world clearly, one might have to pass through the furnace of thought, the splitting of illusions, the death of comfortable lies. Zeus had tried to contain Meteor, the embodiment of cleverness and foresight. He had swallowed her to prevent the prophecy, to avoid being overthrown. But Metis could not be silenced. Her wisdom continued to work within him quietly, patiently, until it reached a breaking point. And at that point, wisdom could no longer be contained. It demanded form, it demanded life. And so Athena was born, not as a child, not as a whisper, but as a fully armed goddess of reason and strategy, of law and truth, of battle fought not for bloodlust, but for justice. Her very nature taught the gods a truth they had long ignored, that wisdom does not arrive like a feather on the breeze. It arrives like lightning in the brain, like a hammer cracking the skull of ignorance, like a sword slicing through fog. It arrives when the mind can no longer pretend, when illusions fall away and the pain of understanding breaks through. This is why Athena was born through suffering, because the most important truths in the cosmos are not handed to us. They are earned. They are laboured for. They require the death of unknowing. Athena's birth was the death of Zeus's illusion, that he could control fate, that he could prevent the future, that he could consume wisdom and keep it silent. Her arrival was the moment when the universe reminded even the gods that some things must emerge, no matter what. And it wasn't just the gods who needed that lesson. Far below Olympus, in the hearts of mortals, that same truth played out endlessly. Every time a human being faced a terrible decision and chose what was right over what was easy, Athena's influence stirred. Every time someone questioned what they had always believed or chose to speak truth in the face of power, she was there. Every time someone sat with their pain long enough to learn from it, rather than run from it, they were, in some quiet way, participating in her birth all over again. Because Athena does not belong to any one moment. She is born again and again, every time wisdom is chosen over instinct, every time thought prevails over impulse, every time someone suffers through confusion and emerges with clarity. That is why wisdom emerges through pain, because pain demands we look. Pain breaks the shell of ignorance. Pain says something is not right. And when we listen, when we bear it, when we do not flee from it, Athena steps forward. That is why she carries a spear and a shield, not to harm, but to protect what is just, to fight for what is right. That is why she wears armour, not because she was attacked, but because truth is always vulnerable and must sometimes be defended. That is why she emerged not with tears, but with silence. Because true wisdom does not scream for attention, simply is. And so, as the gods slowly began to understand the meaning of what they had witnessed, the silence around Athena deepened into reverence. Not the reverence of worship, but of understanding. For she was not just another goddess. She was a truth that could not be hidden, a truth that would always eventually force its way into the light, whether through words or war, or even a god-splitting skull. Athena was not a goddess of chaos, nor a deity of reckless power. She did not descend in storms like Zeus, nor rise from the foam like Aphrodite, nor blaze with rage like Ares. Her power was of a different kind, a quiet, enduring strength that did not seek to overwhelm, but to guide. It was the kind of strength that appeared calm on the surface, but held the weight of worlds beneath. In her, two seemingly opposite forces had found perfect union, strength and thought. The gods of Olympus, as mighty as they were, often leaned toward one or the other. Ares, god of war, was muscle without reflection. Apollo, radiant and brilliant, was thought without restraint. Artemis, fierce and solitary, had strength in spirit, but not always in words. And Zeus himself, the king of gods, ruled with both cunning and force, but never in balance. Athena, however, was the balance. She held a spear, but not for slaughter. She wore armour, but not to intimidate. Her weapons were extensions of her mind, symbols of disciplined power, not raw destruction. Her war was not the bloodthirsty charge of Ares, but the carefully calculated manoeuvre. Her victories were not built on chaos, but on strategy, on foresight. She fought only when justice demanded it. And when she did, it was with precision, with purpose. There was no excess in her, no waste. Every movement had meaning. Every word she spoke carried weight. This harmony of force and intellect made her unique among the gods. The others watched her, unsure of how to respond to such clarity, for they, in their own way, were bound by passion. Hera's jealousy, Dionysus's ecstasy, Poseidon's pride, even Demeter's grief. But Athena moved from a centre untouched by such extremes. She was not without feeling, but her feelings were filtered through understanding. She did not rage, she acted. She did not boast, She demonstrated. She did not threaten, she advised. And yet, there was no weakness in her gentleness, no softness in her grace. She could stand beside Ares on the battlefield and still the clamour of war with a single glance. She could sit with scholars and speak of law, art and philosophy, and command their reverence as surely as any queen. To the mortals below she would become something precious and rare, a deity they could look to not in fear but in hope, not because she promised to grant every desire, but because she taught them how to choose wisely. She did not offer freedom without responsibility. She offered liberty through structure, not the structure of tyranny, but the structure that makes civilization possible. She inspired architects to build cities not just of stone but of law. She whispered to judges about fairness. She guided generals who sought not conquest, but peace. She taught artists to see the geometry in beauty, and scientists to find elegance in truth. To her, strength without thought was dangerous, and thought without strength was impotent. Only together could they build a world worth living in. Athena was that union, the still sword, the quiet voice of power, the warrior who paused to think before striking. This is why she became the patron of Athens, the city of reason, law, debate, and invention. A city built not for kings but for citizens, not ruled by fear but by dialogue. The city chose her over Poseidon not because she promised greater power, but because she promised lasting wisdom. When offered the gift of the ocean god, a mighty horse to conquer the world or vast seas for trade, they turned instead to the goddess who offered something quieter, an olive tree, a tree, roots, growth, nourishment, peace, and yet, what could be more powerful? A tree gives shade, food, oil for lamps, branches for peace offerings. It does not roar, but it endures. It does not destroy, but it sustains. That is the essence of Athena's strength. She was the protector of cities, the goddess of those who build rather than burn. She taught that a true leader uses wisdom to guide strength, and strength to protect wisdom. That might without understanding leads to tyranny, and understanding without action leads to stagnation. Only by balancing the two could a civilization thrive. This is why she stood apart from the others, not as better, but as a reminder, a living symbol of what power looks like when it is restrained by intellect, and what thought looks like when it has the courage to act. She was not just the goddess of war and wisdom, she was the bridge between impulse and insight, and in every person who paused before acting, in every leader who asked not just, "Can I do this?" but "Should I?" In every soldier who fought for justice, not for vengeance, in every mind that questioned, and every hand that built, Athena's spirit lived on. She was the harmony of mind and muscle, of courage and counsel, and through her, the world learned that true power is not domination, it is discernment. Long after the ringing of Hephaestus's hammer had faded, long after the silence of Athena's arrival had settled like dew on Olympus, something even more extraordinary began to unfold, not in thunder or flame, but in the minds of gods and mortals alike. The memory of that moment when wisdom emerged from pain did not fade. It deepened. It echoed. It began to work like roots beneath the surface of the world, quiet, unseen, but powerful. For something had changed, not just on Olympus, but in the very order of things. A new presence had joined the divine chorus, and with it came a new standard, a new shape of the sacred. The birth of Athena was not simply another myth in the grand tapestry of the gods, it was a turning point. Until that moment, much of the divine world had been wild, untamed, chaotic. The gods represented raw forces: storm, fire, love, wine, war, the ocean's fury, the earth's abundance. Their tempers were unpredictable, their stories full of passion, vengeance, ecstasy, and wrath. They were magnificent and terrifying, close to nature and its cycles, often beautiful but rarely fair. But Athena was different. She brought with her not chaos, but coherence, not instinct, but intention. She did not rewrite the myths that had come before her, but she redirected their meaning. She introduced a new current into the divine stream, one that would flow quietly beneath the stories of humankind for thousands of years. Because her story carried with it a message both mythic and deeply human, that even from pain something greater can emerge. That clarity is forged in the furnace of confusion, that there is purpose to struggle, if we listen to it, if we learn from it. This was the legacy of Athena. Her birth had been violence, yes, but it was also vision. And once she arrived, the world had to reckon with her presence. The mortals below did not just worship her, they invoked her, they sought her guidance before battles. They placed her statue at the heart of their cities. They etched her symbols: owl, olive tree, spear into stone and shield and story. Not because they feared her wrath, but because they trusted her judgment. She became a symbol not of control, but of counsel. A goddess who stood beside kings and generals, not above them, whispering strategy, offering patience, reminding them of consequences. And in this she taught an idea so profound, so essential, that it became the very backbone of civilization. That wisdom is not the opposite of power, it is its guide. That reason does not weaken the warrior, it elevates the fight. That justice does not make one soft, it makes one worthy. And perhaps most importantly, that divinity is not just in the storm or the birth or the blood, it is in the thinking, the choosing, the knowing. Through Athena, the Greeks learned to build temples not only of stone but of law, of philosophy, of civic life. They learned that the mind is sacred, that thought is powerful, that silence is not absence, it is awareness. And the story of her birth, bizarre, painful, and unforgettable, served as a mythic reminder of where true power comes from. Not from inheritance, not from force alone, but from what is forged within, from the pressure of unseen questions, from the ache of growing into what one was meant to become, from the sharp pain of realizing the truth and choosing to live by it. Athena was born from a headache, but what a divine irony that was. For headaches mark the edge of thought, the boundary where chaos meets order, where something within demands to be understood. Zeus's pain was not a punishment, it was a birth pang. It was the sign that wisdom could no longer be ignored, swallowed, or contained. And when the axe fell and her form stepped into the world, it was not just the birth of a goddess, it was the beginning of a new way to see, a new way to be. In that moment the gods watched, the stars blinked, and the world changed, not with a shout but with a thought. And from that thought, shaped like a woman in armour, bearing truth in one hand and justice in the other, came the echo that would live forever. That wisdom once born does not die, it guides, it watches, it waits, and it reminds us again and again that even from pain the divine can rise.